Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Rico, and this is Relatively Sound, the channel that breaks out a character for you. Today, I'm here by myself starting a brand new series. Basically, we're going to be taking one of my favorite bands and ranking all of their albums from my least favorite to my favorite. And today, we are going to be talking about one of Austin, Texas's best bands, Spoon. So, to give a brief summary of how I got into Spoon, it was thanks to Lindsay. Around probably 2018 is when she showed me a couple of their songs that she liked. The Underdog, Don't You Ever. And it was around this time when Hot Thoughts had just been released a year before, and the title track was on the radio a bunch. And I remember hearing that song going, ooh, okay, I like that this band can do other sounds than just maybe that kind of classic indie rock sound. So I think it was around that time where I went on Spotify and I started listening to their top popular songs like Inside Out and Do You. And Do You was the song that really hooked me. That was a song that was like, okay, I need to hear more. So then I just started going through all their albums like I do when I get into most bands, and I fell in love pretty quick. Now, when it comes to these rankings, it is going to be pretty simple. I'm basically just going off what albums I like the most and the least. I'm not really going to be ranking these from how important I think they are to the band or artist discography or career. I'm not going to really go in order of the best selling albums or what was the most popular. It's just my favorite. So I'm probably going to have a lot of hot takes, and there's going to be probably a lot of albums on this episode and future episodes where you don't agree with me, and that's great. And the other rule is I'm only doing studio albums, no compilations of any kind. So greatest hits albums, they don't count. Non greatest hits albums don't count. EPs don't count. And no remix albums count as well. And one last thing to note before going into this album rankings or other album rankings in the future is that they're all subject to change. To start off this list, there has to be a least favorite. And unfortunately, it is going to be the band's debut album, Telefono, which was released in 1996. Now, this is not a bad album by any means. I still have enjoyment when I pull the album out from time to time and listen to it. The problem is I'm not doing that often because it just not have a replayable factor to me. And that's mostly because the songs just aren't as memorable, don't move me as much, and don't excite me as much. This is kind of a more raw and I would say gritty album for the band. It's filled with faster songs, short songs, a lot of energy, a lot of spunk. It's fun, but it's just not an album that I think sounds like Spoon. It doesn't have that special Spoon special ingredient, if you will. And although I enjoy this album's more rough around the edges sound, like with the first three songs on the album, especially All the Negatives Have Been Destroyed, I kind of like when the album takes a bit of a breather and we get some slower moments like Cervantes. But overall, the album's still a fun listen. I like songs like Idiot Driver. And there's a lot of kind of swearing on this album, which I find is not very typical now with Spoon's music. So enjoyable aspects to this album, but kind of like how I feel like with a lot of bands' debut albums, this one you could just tell they're not at their best. And it's getting there with each album. I feel like they get better, but this one will, like a lot of debut albums from bands I like, will usually rank more lower on the list for me. So if I was to give this album a rating, I would probably rate it about a 6.5 out of 10. Now, maybe not so shocking, but my ninth favorite Spoon album is going to be their second album titled A Series of Sneaks, which was released in 1998. Now, when I see a lot of rankings from fans when it comes to Spoon, a lot of people will put Telefono, their debut, as their least favorite. But when it comes to this album, A Series of Sneaks, I do feel like I will see some fans rank it a little bit higher than where I'm putting it, which is second to last on my list. But it's kind of the same thing with Telefono, but just everything's elevated just a little bit more. I feel like a lot of these songs are more fleshed out than the ones on Telefono, and we get some more melodic moments, which is probably my favorite area when it comes to Spoon. I feel like when they get a little vibey, sometimes when they get a little softer, I just tend to enjoy that more than when they're trying to really rock out. There are some more highlights on this album than Telephono. I really like Metal Detector. I think the closing track, Advanced Cassette, is probably their best song on these first two albums. And even some of the rock moments on this album stand out more than on the previous album. Something like June's Foreign Spell. I don't have as much to say about this album or the previous one just because I enjoy these albums, but I'm not always going back to them, which is why I probably give this one a 7 out of 10. I almost want to say 6.5, just like Telephono, but it is slightly better. So 7.5 for this album comes in number 9 on my list. Now, this is where we get into my Spoon hot takes, because coming in at number 8 on my list is the band's fourth studio album titled Kill the Moonlight, which was released in 2002. Now, the reason I think this is a hot take is because when I see a lot of other Spoon fans' rankings, this is usually around the 5 mark or even higher. This is my third least favorite Spoon album, which I know is going to be crazy to some people, but it's never clicked with me like it has other fans. I think that it's definitely more of an experimental album, and it kind of shows the band trying some different sounds. We got some acoustic songs. We got some songs with different instrumentation like keys. And we just also have like some weird things going on, some beatboxing. Production is becoming a little bit more kind of that, I feel like, indie rock sound. And I feel like this is the beginning of their kind of Spoon pattern that they have when it comes to their album releases. You get kind of a classic Spoon sounding album, and then you get the experimental one. And then they go back to a more classic sound, and they go a bit more experimental. This is kind of a weird album because I do think it's consistent in the sound. It definitely has that more experimental sound with the production, with just the writing style of the songs. It also feels inconsistent at the same time because you have solid songs. You have the hit The Way We Get By, which just is a classic indie sound. Small Stakes is really fun with the keyboard and the percussion. And when it's played live, it does go pretty hard. And you have my favorite song on the album, which is Vittorio E. But then you just have songs that I just don't ever really go out of my way to listen to outside of the album. Paper Tiger, which I know is a lot of people's favorites from this album, although I appreciate what it's going for with the kind of out there production and just songwriting in general, I think it's more of a blueprint for The Ghost of You Lingers off of Ga 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 Ga, which I think is a stronger song. Although I do think one of their most underrated songs is Don't Let It Get You Down. I can see why this album gets praise because it was the band's maybe first step into doing something different than just kind of rock or even indie rock. But it'll always just be kind of a mixed bag album for me. And because of that, unfortunately, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. I do think it's better than the first two because it's maybe more interesting, but the songwriting quality is not as strong as all the other albums I have further up on this list. All right, now we are moving on to my 7th favorite Spoon album, and this is probably going to be another controversial take, but we have the band's 5th album, Gimme Fiction, which was released in 2005. I will say that I think this is Spoon's spooniest album. It has the perfect amount of kind of weird production choices, but also solid production. It has some of their catchiest songs. It has some of their maybe most fan favorite songs, had a pretty decent single on it, and it is solid. But for me, I kind of think this album's a tad overrated. Now, don't get me wrong, before you bring out the pitchforks, I do think this is maybe one of the best sounding Spoon albums when it comes to production. And I think this album is more consistent than Kill the Moonlight. But there's just something about this album that I think works for more fans than it does for me. But even though this album has some highs, it kind of has a lot of misses for me. There's just some songs on this album that I don't gel with as much. The opening track, The Beast and Dragon Adored, was probably the song that I consider to be the most overrated Spoon song of all time. Now, I've seen it live twice since I got into the band, and I definitely enjoy it more. The closing track, Merchants of Soul, is also another song that I feel like a lot of people don't love, me included. And maybe my least favorite Spoon single is I Turn My Camera On. I will say, though, this album does have some strong songs. I think My Mathematical Mind is my favorite. It's definitely a jammy song, which I really appreciate. And this song goes hard live. But I also really like the following track on the album, The Delicate Place. Probably one of my favorite Spoon songs when it comes to songs that I feel like are underrated. And even though I can see why this is some people's favorite Spoon album, I like it more than other Spoon albums, but there's a lot of Spoon albums that I think are just better than it. It's an album I want to like more than I do. So giving it a 7.5 out of 10 is probably going to make some people furious. But again, just my opinions, just the way I prefer these albums. So Gimme Fiction comes in at number 7. All right, coming at number 6 on my list, we've got the band's 8th studio album, They Want My Soul, released in 2014. When I got into this band, this was one of the albums that when I first heard it, I loved it. But the more I listened to some of their other albums, the more this album dropped on my list, because this probably was a top 3 at one point in the early stages of my discovery of Spoon. I do think this is a good bounce back album from Transference. Now, Transference doesn't get to make the list, so I like Transference more than this. So what I mean by bounce back is it's that Spoon pattern. Transference was one of their most experimental albums. This was kind of their return to form, them going back to that classic Spoon sound. My problem is, I think maybe it was just a little too safe of an album. That said, the highs on this album are extremely high. Do You, one of my favorite Spoon songs of all time. I think maybe the song that kind of got me into the band the most when I first heard it and made me want to check out the rest of the discographies. I also really like the title track, the production with the guitars going back and forth. And wait, there's some underrated moments on this album as well. I think Outlier is really cool. And Let Me Be Mine kind of has maybe like a classic Beatles sound to it. But I do think there's some songs that hold this album back. And that's actually going to be the opening track and the closing track. Opening track, Rent I Pay, is kind of like their go-to closing song when it comes to live sets. And I kind of understand why. It's kind of a fun bluesy rock song. I can see that pumping the crowd up, but it's never been a favorite of mine. And then the closing track, New York Kiss, I see a lot of people say that this one's underrated, but it's not one that I rate super highly. It's just, it feels a little safe for a Spoon album. I do think the next 5 albums on my list take more risk, or the classic sounds just hit harder for me. I feel like I can't rate it any higher than an 8 out of 10. So coming in at number 5, we've got maybe a hot take, but for different reasons. We got the band's 3rd studio album, Girls Can Tell, which was released in 2001. Now, I think the band has 2 really underrated albums. Well, maybe 3. We'll get to why in a minute. But this album, I think, is fairly underrated because I think when it comes to their first 4 albums, this is by far their best. I think the band was able to fine tune the more jagged edge sound to their first 2 albums and kind of make the more abrasive rock songs sound a little bit more melodic, a little catchier, and just kind of overall more memorable, at least for me. That said, this album was kind of a grow for me. There was a lot of songs on this album that I kind of remember listening to and not loving. Now, I will say, unlike Gimme Fiction, this album is not their best sounding album when it comes to production, but the songs are so good that I don't think it matters that much. And I think it actually fits some of these songs in the way they were written, like Believe in His Art or Plead the Fifth. I also think this album has one of their best A-sides when you look at the track list. Everything Hits at Once, even though it's kind of a slower opener, it is like a slow burn. Mean the Bean is a cover, but is a fantastic cover because even though the original song is great, because I do think it has a good chord progression and lyrics, Spoon just kind of takes the song to a next level. Finisher, my favorite song on this album. It has so much charm, and really the whole album does, but this song specifically just, it has that kind of vintage sound when it comes to the instrumentation. It has that kind of harpsichord thing that reminds me of the Beatles, but the riff and like the rhythm of it is not like the Beatles. And Britt singing about how he wishes for days where people wore fitted shirts and said yes and thank you. Like it's funny, it's kind of cute, but it also rocks hard, and it has some really great leads at the very end of the song. Yeah, really underrated album. Love a lot of these songs. Love the album as a whole. It's going to get an 8.5 out of 10. Coming in at my 4th spot, we have the band's 7th studio album, Transference, which was released in 2010. Transference is kind of a weird album because I feel like when it comes to fans and their reaction to it, they either love it or they hate it. Now, I love it because of how weird it is. It is by far the weirdest album when it comes to not only song production, but just the songwriting in general. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but when it works, it really works. And it's also weird because it's one of those albums where there's not as many standout tracks, but it's one of those albums that flows perfectly. I can make a list of the weird production choices on this album. I mean, you have moments of songs where Brit's vocals just cut out completely, like on the song Is Love Forever. You have the Mystery Zone where it's just constantly building, but then never really goes anywhere. Trouble Comes Running could have been maybe one of their biggest songs if they released it as a single, but it wouldn't have really worked as a single because you have like the drums panned on one side, the guitar sounds like really lo-fi, you can't hear the vocals as well. Like, it is a fantastic song with arguably bad production, but it kind of makes the song better for it. And you still have great rock moments on this album. I think the Mystery Zone is an example of that. I think Got Nothing is the best example of that on this album. Although my favorite on this album has to be Outgo the Lights. One of their best songs just because of the bass line that comes in near the end of the song. The album also just seems like it has themes, like when it comes to the lyrics. Like, I don't know if this is like a breakup album, but there's a lot of songs on this album that I feel like have to do with like relationship struggles, on songs like Got Nothing, on songs like Before Destruction, which I think is a very interesting and underrated album opener for them. Now, before doing this ranking, I would have swore that I would have put Girls Can Tell above this album, but I just think as a whole, this album flows better than Girls Can Tell and maybe has some more interesting moments, which is not only why it comes in at number 4, but it's also going to get a 9 out of 10 for me. All right, we are entering my top 3 favorite Spoon albums, and coming in at number 3, maybe another underrated album, is Hot Thoughts, their 9th studio album, which came out in 2017. Now, I know this is also a kind of another hit or miss album when it comes to fans, and that's because it's the band maybe taking their most risk when it comes to genre, because this album has a lot of poppy songs, a lot of dancey songs. It's very vibrant, it's colorful, it's flashy, but it's not really rock. Like, yeah, there's a lot of guitars on this album, but there's also a lot of synths, a lot of keys. Now, I do have some personal attachments to this album. I got into this band maybe like a year or two after this album dropped. So it was one of the first albums of theirs I checked out. And even though this genre of album isn't usually my go-to, I enjoyed it a lot. And then when I showed Lindsay this album and she kind of got more into Spoon, this became her instant favorite and still is her favorite. And that's just because it's maybe their most unique and interesting album. For example, one of my favorite Spoon songs of all time, and it's Lindsay's favorite Spoon songs of all time, is the second song on the album, Whisper and I'll Listen to Hear It. It starts off with just like some pulsating synths and keys with Brit's vocals, and you don't know where the song's going, and it kind of stays like that for a while. But man, the second the rest of the band comes in with the drums, with the heavy bass line, with the cool little guitar leads, the song explodes and it just becomes like just this fantastic groove. It's like an adrenaline rush. But there's just other moments on this album that I think are very interesting. I think First Caress is maybe the most dancey song on this album. You also have the single Can I Sit Next to You? Same kind of goes for the song Can I Talk You Into It? Not my favorite song lyrically, but I do love the groove, and it's a little bit more rock than some of the other songs, and it does sound really great in a live setting. You also have the title track, Hot Thoughts, the album opener, which is kind of a perfect mix of the band going, hey, we're going to do something maybe a little funkier, a little groovier, a little dancier, but we're still going to have these memorable riffs and we're still going to do things that make us sound like Spoon. But far and away, the two most experimental moments on this album come with the songs Pink Up and the closing track, Us. Where maybe it doesn't work as well, at least for me, is with the closing track, Us, which is an instrumental. The reason why this song doesn't work for me is because it's an almost 5-minute song with really kind of no groove. It has some really cool things going on with it, with the saxophone. There's nothing in the song that grabs me other than the little bit of the instrumental from Pink Up that they put in the song. That is a cool callback. I think this is a near perfect album. And if it wasn't for Us, that closing instrumental track, I think this would be a 10 out of 10 for me. But right now it's going to sit at a 9.5 out of 10. So if you're doing the math, there's two albums left. What's going to be two? What's going to be one? Well, I'll tell you what two is right now. My second favorite Spoon album is going to be Ga 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 Ga, their sixth studio album released in 2007. Now, I know this is probably a safe choice. When it comes to what is your favorite Spoon albums, putting this album at number two, you're not going to make a lot of people upset. It has two of their biggest songs, which is The Underdog and their cover of Don't You Ever. It has just a lot of those classic Spoon sounds, like on Gimme Fiction, but maybe even a little bit more safe. I think this is just their most consistent album. It blends like the acoustic songs and the rock songs perfectly. It has moments that you're like, this is a little out there for Spoon. Ghost of You Lingers being one of them. You also have some kind of oddball chord progressions, like with My Little Japanese Cigarette Case, which I love. And then you just have like classic Spoon ass moments. You've got your Cherry Bomb, which super hooky, super catchy. Of course, I mentioned the two singles, which are also their biggest songs for a good reason. And then you got my two favorite songs on the album, which is the album opener, Don't Make Me a Target, and the penultimate track, Finer Feelings. Don't Make Me a Target is the one song that I did not get to hear when I saw them twice a couple of years ago that I wish I had seen, because I just love that descending guitar riff and progression. I love when they bring in the keys later on. I love the somewhat political lyrics on this song. I love the way it ramps up during the bridge. It just has like everything I want in a Spoon song. And there's just nothing to hate on this album. Like, even maybe my least favorite song, like A Rhythm and Soul or Eddie's Raga, like, I still go back and listen to the songs and go like, yeah, there's something about these songs that don't sound stale, that sound different, that sound new. Honestly, because there's nothing I dislike about this album, it's going to get a 10 out of 10 for me. So if that album got a 10 out of 10 for me and is only my second favorite Spoon album, what's number one? Well, if you were following along with the list, you probably already know. And this t-shirt kind of gives it away. But it is going to be their most recent album, Lucifer on the Sofa, their 10th studio album, and it came out in 2022. Right off the bat, there's going to be a couple biases here. First, you got recency bias. It's their newest album. It sounds the most fresh. There's that. But this album came out now 3 years ago. So how new is it really? I have to be honest about it. This was my first new Spoon album since I got into the band. It has all of those classic Spoon sounds that you hear on Ga 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 and other albums like Gimme Fiction and They Want My Soul. But there's also like some callbacks to like maybe rock songs from the 70s, especially with a song like The Devil and Mr. Jones. When I hear that, it gives me some like Bruce Springsteen and the E Street vibes with the horns. You have Wild, which I talked about already. But the reason I really liked Wild is because it sounded new for the band while sounding old, because it kind of reminded me of something like U2. Those guitar leads and the tones sound very clean. The song had a really good groove with the bass and drums. Kind of reminded me a little bit like, I don't know if I'd say Joshua Tree U2, but maybe more like Octoon Baby, like something just really solid, which that's my favorite U2 album, so go figure. And you have the title track, which is one of my favorite Spoon songs of all time. It's like they took the idea of Us with the saxophone and the kind of more chill vibe, and they made it into like an actual song. We get a solid drum beat. We get some nice electric keys, some really faint and subtle guitar, which I think is actually great because I feel like the drums and the sax and the keys is what really makes this song. I know it might not be the band at their technical best or their most challenging or most experimental or interesting, but it just has the right amount of risk and safe moments and classic Spoon sounds and perfect production. There's no bad song. So yeah, that's gonna be my favorite Spoon albums, ranked from least favorite to favorite. I think I'm gonna put on screen here a little picture that has them in order with my ratings for each album because obviously I think Lucifer on the Sofa is a 10. I think it's their best album. And I'm going to quickly list my top 10 favorite Spoon songs. Again, I am going to order them, but I do think these songs could change order very quickly day to day. So going from number 10 to number one, my 10th favorite Spoon song would probably be Vittorio E from Kill the Moonlight. Number 9, Hot Thoughts, title track from Hot Thoughts. 8 would be Wild from Lucifer. 7 would be My Mathematical Mind from Gimme Fiction. 6 would be the album opener from Gaga Gaga Ga, Don't Make Me a Target. 5, The Fitted Shirt from Girls Can Tell. 4, Outgo the Lights from Transference. 3 would be Lucifer on the Sofa, title track. 2 would be Do You from They Want My Soul. And 1 would be Whisper and I'll Listen to Hear It from Hot Thoughts. The reason I cringed a little when saying that is because these are the two songs that swap the most. Do You and Whisper and I'll Listen to Hear It, because Do You, I think, is the song that got me to the band the most, but I think Whisper is their best song from a technical standpoint, and maybe is the song that I want to listen to the most outside of Do You and Lucifer. So maybe for Lindsay's sake, I'll put Whisper as number one because that's her favorite Spoon song, but those three, Whisper, Do You, and Lucifer, some of their best songs. So that was my ranking. Definitely some hot takes, probably also some normie takes, but I want to hear from you guys. Let me know, where do you think I went all right? Where do you think I went wrong? What are your favorite Spoon albums? Can you rank them? And if you do, where would each album place? What's your favorite? What's your least favorite? What are your favorite Spoon songs? Let me know. I am very curious. And I'm definitely going to be doing one of these again, maybe next month. I'm going to take another one of my favorite artists. I'll be back soon with another episode, or at least another one with Tony. But until then, I hope you take care, and you'll be hearing from us soon. Bye-bye.